there, and welcome to this deep dive into the world of emotional intelligence. We're going way past the buzzwords today, using the insights from the HBR guide to emotional intelligence to really understand how this stuff works, not just in the boardroom, but in everyday life.
It's a classic for a reason, and it's amazing how relevant these concepts remain.
Mm.
We're talking about practical tools, not just theoretical fluff.
Right. Everyone talks about emotional intelligence, but let's be honest, sometimes it feels like nobody wants to define it. So let's break it down. What is this elusive EI, and why should we actually care?
Think of it like this. Emotional intelligence is your ability to understand and manage your emotions, but also to navigate the complex world of other people's feelings. It's about using that understanding to create positive outcomes both for yourself and those around you.
Okay, so it's not just about being nice all the time. I think there's a misconception that EI is all about being agreeable.
Exactly. You've hit on a major point. The HBR guide debunks this myth right away. Emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing your emotions or trying to be liked by everyone. It's about developing self-awareness and social skills to navigate the full spectrum of human emotions, even the messy ones, in a way that's both authentic and effective.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we all have emotions, but EI gives us the tools to use them to our advantage, rather
Yeah.
than letting them control us.
Precisely. The HBR guide uses a great analogy. Think of musical ability. Some people might be naturally gifted, but even if you weren't born with perfect pitch, you can still learn to play an instrument, even if it's just chopsticks on the piano. It's the same with EI. It's not about being born with some EQ gene. It's about putting in the effort to develop these skills.
I love that. It's not about becoming Mozart overnight, but about recognizing that everyone has a starting point and the potential to grow. So if we're not born with it, how do we actually build our emotional intelligence?
Well, the guide breaks down emotional intelligence into 5 key components: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Each of these areas can be developed and strengthened over time with practice and intention.
Let's dive into self-awareness for a bit, because it feels like that's the foundation for everything else, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The HBR guide emphasizes that you can't manage what you don't understand. It's like trying to sail a ship without a rudder. Self-awareness is about understanding your own emotions, what triggers them, how they influence your behavior, and how they impact the people around you.
So it's not just about knowing you're feeling something, but understanding why you're feeling it.
Exactly.
Like the-
And that's where things get interesting because sometimes we misinterpret our own emotions.
Right.
We slap a label on them without really digging deeper. Have you ever had one of those days where you're in a bad mood and you blame it on work, but then you realize actually it's because you had a fight with your partner that morning?
Oh, all the time. I'm definitely guilty of misplacing my emotions from time to time.
The HBR guide emphasizes the importance of being more precise with our emotional vocabulary. It's not just happy or sad or angry. There's a whole spectrum of human emotions, and being able to accurately label them is crucial for self-awareness.
So instead of just saying, I feel bad, you say, I feel frustrated because, or I feel disappointed because.
Exactly. The HBR guide tells a fascinating story about a man named Ed who was struggling in his marriage because he kept misinterpreting his wife's emotions. He'd always label her as angry, which, as you can imagine, would escalate their arguments.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't go over well.
Right. But then he started to pay closer attention to the nuances of her emotions and realized she wasn't always actually angry. Sometimes she was just annoyed or impatient or stressed. And that shift in perspective, being able to accurately label her emotions, transformed their entire relationship.
That's amazing. It highlights how even subtle differences in our emotional vocabulary can have a huge impact on our relationships.
Absolutely. And the HBR guide goes on to explain that emotions actually provide us with valuable information about ourselves and the world around us, which can be incredibly useful once we learn to listen.
That's really interesting. So how do we get better at tuning into those subtle emotional signals? So we're talking about fine-tuning our emotional radar, right? What are some practical ways we can do that?
Well, the HBR guide suggests a few powerful techniques. One that really stood out to me is the power of writing. It sounds simple, but there's actually a lot of research to back it up.
Writing, like journaling.
Exactly. The guide highlights the work of James Pennebaker, who's done fascinating research in this area. He's found that simply writing about our emotional experiences for 15-20 minutes a day can have a profound impact on our well-being.
I've heard journaling for stress relief, but what's the connection to emotional intelligence?
It's about creating space for reflection and deeper understanding. When we write about our feelings, we're forced to slow down examine them more closely, and find the words to articulate them. This process alone can help us gain clarity and insight.
So it's like we're translating our emotions from this jumbled mess into something coherent we can actually work with.
Exactly. And Pennebaker's research has shown some pretty remarkable results. People who wrote about their emotions experienced improved mood, reduced stress levels, and even strengthened immune function. There's even evidence that it can help people process traumatic experiences more effectively.
That's incredible. I'm starting to see how this simple act of writing can be such a powerful tool for self-awareness and emotional regulation.
It's not just about venting or getting things off your chest, although that is
Yeah.
helpful too. It's about engaging in a conscious dialogue with yourself about your emotional landscape.
So it's like having a heart-to-heart with yourself on paper.
Precisely. And the HBR guide suggests that this process can help us identify patterns in our emotions, recognize triggers that set us off, and develop healthier coping mechanisms. It's like shining a light on the hidden corners of our emotional world.
Okay, so we're getting a handle on our own emotions, but what about dealing with other people's emotions? That feels like a whole other level of complexity.
You're right, and that's where the other components of EI come in self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And the HBR guide is packed with practical strategies for putting those components into action.
Let's hear them. What are some specific techniques for navigating those tricky interpersonal situations?
Well, one of the most valuable tools in the EI arsenal is something called reframing. Imagine you're in a tense meeting and a colleague shoots down your idea in a way that feels disrespectful. Your immediate reaction might be to get defensive or even angry.
Oh, I've been there. It's so easy to take things personally in the heat of the moment.
Exactly. But reframing allows us to take a step back and challenge those automatic negative thoughts. Instead of assuming the worst that your colleague is trying to undermine you, what if you tried to see the situation from their perspective?
So instead of reacting defensively, I'd try to understand where they're coming from.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Maybe they're stressed about a deadline, or maybe they had a bad interaction earlier that day. Reframing doesn't mean letting people off the hook for bad behavior, but it allows us to approach the situation with more empathy and understanding.
That makes sense. It's about shifting from a place of judgment to a place of curiosity. But what if the other person is being truly difficult or even aggressive? Reframing might not cut it in those situations.
You're right. The HBR guide acknowledges that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, especially when dealing with challenging personalities. But it does offer a technique called neutralizing that I found particularly useful for navigating those situations.
Neutralizing. Tell me more about that.
Essentially, it's about staying calm and composed in the face of someone else's difficult behavior, kind of like a Jedi Master deflecting blaster fire. It's not about suppressing your own emotions, but about choosing not to engage with theirs in a way that escalates the conflict.
So it's like refusing to play their game.
Exactly. The guide gives specific techniques for dealing with various types of difficult behavior. For example, if someone is being overly aggressive, you might try using humor to diffuse the tension, or simply acknowledging their perspective without agreeing with it.
I like that acknowledging their perspective without getting sucked into their emotional whirlwind.
Right. And for someone who's being disrespectful, you might calmly but firmly set boundaries, letting them know that their behavior is unacceptable. The key is to stay grounded in your own emotional center and respond in a way that's both assertive and respectful.
It sounds like these techniques require a lot of self-awareness and self-regulation. How do we stay calm and collected when our buttons are being pushed?
That's where anchoring comes in handy.
Anchoring, like dropping anchor on a boat.
In a way, it's about using your body to ground yourself in the present moment and calm your nervous system. The HBR guide gives some great examples like taking a single intentional breath, paying attention to the sensations in your feet on the ground, or even silently repeating a calming word or phrase to yourself.
It's like hitting the pause button on your emotional reaction and giving yourself a moment to regroup.
Exactly. The HBR guide tells a great story about a student who used breathwork to stay calm during high-pressure venture capital pitches.
Now, that takes some serious emotional regulation skills.
Right. But it illustrates how these techniques can be applied in all sorts of situations, not just when dealing with difficult people. They can help us stay grounded and focused even in the face of intense pressure or stress.
So it's not just about managing other people's emotions, but also about managing our own so we can show up as our best selves in any situation.
Absolutely. And that's what makes emotional intelligence such a game changer, both in our personal and professional lives.
This is all so insightful. We've covered a lot of ground, from the importance of self-awareness and accurate emotional labeling to practical strategies for managing our own emotions and navigating challenging interpersonal dynamics. But I'm curious, does the HBR guide address the concept of emotional intelligence at a broader level, like in the context of the workplace as a whole?
It does. The guide delves into the fascinating concept of emotional culture, which refers to the collective emotional tone of an organization.
So, like, is it a generally happy and supportive environment, or is it more tense and
Yeah,
competitive?
like you walk in and you can just tell, right?
Right.
Whether it's a good place to work or if everyone's kind of on edge all the time, it's definitely something you can feel. And the HBR guide makes it clear that it's not magic. It comes down to things like how the leadership acts, what the rules are, even just the physical space itself. All those things come together to create that atmosphere.
So it's not just about having a cool office with like beanbag chairs and stuff.
Right. Those things might make it more fun to be there, but they don't get at the heart of it. A really healthy emotional culture. It comes from things like trust, respect, being able to talk openly,
Yeah.
and people genuinely caring about each other. It's about being able to be yourself without worrying if you make a mistake, you're in trouble.
That makes sense. If you're always walking on eggshells worried about messing up, you're never going to feel like you can try something new or take a chance, right?
Exactly. And that's why leadership is so important when it comes to this emotional culture. Like the HBR guide says, leaders are basically like emotional architects, even if they don't realize it. Everything they do sends out signals, their words, their actions, even just their attitude.
So you've really got to be aware of what kind of vibe you're putting out there, even in small moments.
Exactly. It's not just about big speeches or changing all the rules. It's the everyday stuff. How you handle it when people disagree, how you give feedback, how you celebrate when things go well, even just how you react when something goes wrong. All of that adds to the overall emotional feel of the workplace.
It's like you're weaving this big tapestry of emotions, and every little interaction is a thread.
I like that. That's a great way to put it. And the HBR guide has some very specific things leaders can do to create a more positive environment.
Mm.
For example, it talks about how important it is to recognize even small accomplishments. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and forget to acknowledge when your team does well. But even a simple thank you or mentioning it in a meeting can make people feel appreciated and boost morale.
Yeah, instead of just focusing on what needs fixing, it's important to notice and acknowledge the good stuff too.
Exactly. And the HBR guide also talks about how crucial it is to be transparent and communicate openly, especially when things are changing or uncertain. When leaders are upfront about challenges and keep their team in the loop, it builds trust and helps everyone feel like they're in it together.
So it's not about pretending everything's perfect, but being real even when things are tough.
Exactly. And it's also about creating time for people to connect in ways that aren't just about work. The HBR guide mentions companies that organize things like volunteering events or team building activities or even just casual get-togethers. These things can help build a feeling of community among colleagues.
Right. It's like remembering that we're all people with emotions, not just robots here to do a job.
Mhm.
Making time for those human connections can make a big difference in how people feel about work.
Exactly. When people feel connected and like they matter, they're going to bring their best selves to work, and that benefits everyone.
This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I understand emotional intelligence so much better now, not just for ourselves, but how it affects our workplaces and really all parts of our lives.
It's been great exploring this with you. The HBR Guide to Emotional Intelligence is such a valuable tool for anyone who wants to understand and manage their emotions better. It's a great reminder that we all have the power to create more fulfilling and positive experiences for ourselves and the people around us.
I love that. And for our listeners who want to delve deeper into all this, we'll be sure to link to the HBR guide and other helpful resources in the show notes.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn about the fascinating world of emotional intelligence.
And remember, it's not just about listening, it's about taking what you've learned and putting it into practice. Pay attention to the emotional culture of your own workplace and think about how you can contribute to making it a more positive and supportive environment. Until next time, keep diving deep.